Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters, and welcome back to the Islamic SHAHADA channel. Madagascar, the world's fourth largest island, lies quietly off the southeastern coast of Africa, vast, isolated, and often forgotten by global headlines. Yet in October 2025, this remote nation found itself at the center of political turmoil. After months of escalating demonstrations led by students and young activists protesting rolling blackouts, chronic unemployment, and corruption scandals, the military seized control of the government in Antananarivo. The coup marked another chapter in Madagascar's fragile experiment with democracy, a reminder that the island's political foundations remain as unstable as its eroding rainforests. But beyond the noise of political collapse, another, quieter story endures, one that cannot be overthrown or silenced. It is the story of faith. In the shadow of instability, Islam in Madagascar persists as a subtle yet resilient current flowing beneath the surface of national identity. Muslims today make up an estimated 7% of Madagascar's 30 million people, a figure that has grown gradually despite limited institutional recognition. Their presence predates colonial borders and modern politics, reaching back to the first Arab and Swahili traders who arrived on the island's western shores over 1,000 years ago, long before Europeans ever set foot here. These early Muslim settlers, merchants from Yemen, Oman, and the East African coast, brought not only trade but also culture, language, and spiritual frameworks that would leave a lasting imprint on Malagasy society. The traces remain visible today in the Arabic influences found in the Malagasy language, in coastal town names such as Mahajanga and Morondava, and in family lineages that still carry Islamic roots across generations. As Madagascar became a crossroads of African, Arab, and Austronesian civilizations, Islam provided a sense of moral structure amid diversity. It offered not just religious guidance, but a communal code of conduct, emphasizing honesty in trade, justice in leadership, and respect for human dignity. These values quietly shaped the coastal societies of the island's northwest and southwest regions, where mosques still stand facing the Indian Ocean, their calls to prayer merging with the rhythm of the sea. Fast forward to 2025, and the same moral compass continues to guide communities navigating hardship. While the capital city reels from political uncertainty and economic distress, Muslim neighborhoods in Mahajanga, Nosy Be, and Tulayar have become centers of social stability. In a country where state institutions often fail to deliver basic needs, local mosques provide food assistance, education, and mediation in community disputes. Islamic charities, both domestic and international, quietly operate in these areas, addressing hunger, literacy, and health, often without recognition from the broader public. Long before the arrival of European explorers, and centuries before the word colonialism entered Malagasy consciousness, Islam had already crossed the Indian Ocean and found a home on the island. The story begins more than 1,000 years ago, when Arab, Persian, and Swahili traders navigated the monsoon winds that connected East Africa, Arabia, and the vast islands of the Indian Ocean. Among the spices, gold, and ivory they carried, they also brought ideas, language, art, and most importantly, faith. By the 10th century, records suggest that Muslim merchants from the Hadramaut region of Yemen, the Comoros Islands, and the Swahili coast of East Africa were frequent visitors to Madagascar's western shores. These early traders established permanent settlements along ports such as Mahajanga, Nosy Be, and Tulayar, marrying into local Malagasy communities and introducing Islamic customs through daily life rather than through conquest or coercion. Archaeological findings in the northwest region, including old mosques, Islamic gravestones with Arabic inscriptions, and artifacts bearing Swahili influence, confirm that Islam became part of Madagascar's cultural fabric long before the 15th century. The religion spread primarily through social and commercial relationships, not political dominance. Islam's emphasis on honesty, trust, and community solidarity resonated deeply with the Malagasy values of kinship and reciprocity. Over time, the early Malagasy Muslims integrated Islamic teachings with their Austronesian and African heritage, creating a syncretic yet distinctly Malagasy form of Islam. Traditional ceremonies often coexisted with Quranic recitations, and Arabic script, known locally as SHAHADA, was adapted to write the Malagasy language. This linguistic innovation, particularly among the Antamoro people of southeastern Madagascar, became one of the earliest examples of Islamic literary influence in sub-Saharan Africa. The SHAHADA manuscripts recorded genealogies, astrology, medicine, and Islamic prayers, reflecting how Islam shaped both intellectual and spiritual life across the island. Despite its early presence, Islam never sought political dominance. For centuries, Muslims coexisted peacefully with followers of ancestral religions and later with Christian communities introduced by European missions. In this religiously plural society, Islam's strength lay not in numbers, but in continuity, preserved through family traditions, small mosque networks, and the oral transmission of the Quran from generation to generation. The French colonization of Madagascar, 1896 to 1960, however, disrupted this organic growth. The colonial government, in alliance with Catholic and Protestant missions, prioritized Christian education and actively marginalized Muslim schools and leaders. Arabic teaching was restricted, mosque construction was tightly monitored, and Islamic judges, once respected for mediating local disputes, lost their legal authority. Conversion to Christianity was often tied to access to education and administrative employment, leaving many Muslim communities economically and socially isolated. Yet, even under colonial repression, Islam survived underground. Muslim families continued to teach the Quran privately in madrasas hidden behind family homes. Islamic traditions, from naming ceremonies to Ramadan fasts, were passed on quietly within households. Oral transmission replaced formal institutions, ensuring that the faith endured through memory, recitation, and the rhythms of daily life. After independence in 1960, Madagascar entered a new era of nationalism and identity building. While the post-colonial state did not explicitly persecute Muslims, it also did not prioritize their representation. The Christian majority elite, often educated in French schools, dominated politics, while Muslims remained concentrated in commerce and small-scale trade, particularly in coastal regions. Despite this marginalization, Islamic culture continued to influence urban architecture, cuisine, and family structure, especially in port cities that remained connected to East Africa and the Middle East. By 2025, Islam's demographic presence may appear modest, estimated between 2% and 7% of Madagascar's 30 million citizens, but its historical depth is profound. These communities form the living legacy of an ancient Indian Ocean civilization, linking Madagascar not only to Africa, but also to Arabia and Southeast Asia. Mosques that once faced Mecca from wooden fishing towns now share skylines with modern markets and cell towers. The Adhan, though faint in some places, still echoes through the humid air of Mahajanga at dawn, just as it did a millennium ago. To understand the position of Muslims in Madagascar today, one must first confront the wider landscape of hardship that defines the country as a whole. Madagascar, despite its breathtaking biodiversity and natural resources, remains one of the poorest nations on Earth. The island's extraordinary ecology, home to lemurs, baobabs, and coral reefs found nowhere else, stands in sharp contrast to the harsh economic realities of its people. As of 2025, more than 75% of Madagascar's 30 million citizens live below the international poverty line. Entire communities survive on less than $2 a day. Electricity remains a luxury, particularly outside the capital Antananarivo, where only a fraction of households are connected to the grid. Rural and coastal regions, where many Muslim communities are concentrated, often experience power outages lasting days. Clean water is scarce, sanitation is inadequate, and healthcare access is limited. According to recent UN reports, malnutrition affects nearly half of all Malagasy children, marking one of the highest rates of chronic hunger in the world. The roots of this poverty are complex, a combination of historical neglect, weak governance, environmental degradation, and global economic dependence. Madagascar's economy relies heavily on raw material exports, vanilla, nickel, and cobalt. While the island produces more than 80% of the world's natural vanilla, farmers see little of the profit. Prices fluctuate wildly on international markets, leaving smallholders trapped in cycles of debt and uncertainty. Deforestation, driven by illegal logging and slash-and-burn agriculture, has eroded the soil and undermined local livelihoods, further entrenching rural poverty. For the youth generation, which makes up nearly 60% of the population, this situation has become unbearable. Opportunities for education and employment are scarce. University graduates struggle to find work, while millions of young people in urban slums or remote villages see no path forward. Corruption, bureaucratic inefficiency, and political favoritism have deepened the frustration. By mid-2025, these frustrations erupted into one of the most significant waves of protest in Madagascar's recent history. Sparked initially by rolling blackouts and increased fuel prices, the demonstrations quickly expanded into a nationwide movement demanding transparency, accountability, and social justice. Youth-led groups in Antananarivo, Toamasina, and Mahajanga marched through the streets chanting "Rarini si Fandriampa Halamana," justice and peace. The government's response was harsh. Security forces cracked down on protesters, and dozens were detained. Amid growing unrest, military leaders seized control in October 2025, toppling the civilian government in what was described as a stabilization intervention. The coup deepened international isolation, with foreign aid and investment temporarily suspended pending political normalization. For the ordinary Malagasy citizen, however, nothing changed. Power remained unreliable, inflation surged, and unemployment soared. Within this national turmoil, Muslim communities experienced the same struggles, and in some cases, sharper ones. Most Muslims in Madagascar live in coastal towns such as Mahajanga, Nosy Be, and Tuliar, or in poorer urban districts of Antananarivo. These areas, long neglected by central authorities, were hit hardest by the economic collapse. During power outages, mosques often go dark, unable to run basic facilities such as lighting or sound systems for the call to prayer. Religious schools, or madrasas, face funding shortages as families prioritize food over education. Teachers work without pay for months. Rising costs of rice and imported goods have forced many families to break the Ramadan fast with little more than cassava or bread. Even the simple act of maintaining religious life has become an act of endurance. Friday prayers continue under candlelight. Qur'ans are shared among dozens of students, and community leaders, the imams, now serve not only as spiritual guides, but also as informal social workers, mediating disputes, distributing charity, and coordinating relief for struggling households. The economic burden on Muslim traders has also been severe. Many rely on small-scale commerce, selling textiles, spices, or fish, which has suffered under inflation and political instability. Port closures and disrupted transport routes have crippled trade networks that once connected Madagascar's Muslim merchants with East Africa and the Middle East. Yet amid this despair, faith has remained a form of psychological and communal resilience. For many Muslims, Islam functions as both a moral anchor and a social safety net. Local mosques organize collective charity drives, distributing food during crises when state aid fails to arrive. Women's groups have formed informal cooperatives, pooling resources to fund micro-businesses and support widows or orphans. Religious leaders, often trusted more than politicians, have become voices of stability and peace in a fractured society. By mid-October 2025, Madagascar reached a breaking point. After months of escalating protests, economic paralysis, and social unrest, the fragile balance between government and people finally shattered. President Andry Rajoelina, who had ruled through a mix of populism and military alliance since returning to power in 2019, faced the most significant challenge of his political life. What began as demonstrations over power cuts, fuel shortages, and corruption scandals had evolved into a full-blown national uprising, one that demanded systemic change rather than temporary relief. In the capital, Antananarivo, protests swelled into the tens of thousands. Students, laborers, and unemployed youth marched under banners demanding Vahoaka no tena tomponi fahefana. The people are the true holders of power. Police stations were overrun and several ministries were forced to close. The government's promises of reform rang hollow amid soaring inflation and growing discontent. On October 14, 2025, the situation reached its climax. Colonel Michael Randrianarina, a senior figure within the Malagasy Armed Forces and a former ally of the president, announced that the military had intervened to restore order and national unity. Tanks rolled into Antananarivo. Soldiers occupied key intersections, television stations, and government buildings. By evening, the presidency had fallen, and Andry Rajoelina fled the capital under military escort. The African Union immediately condemned the takeover, suspending Madagascar's membership and calling for a swift return to civilian rule. The United Nations expressed concern over potential human rights violations, while neighboring African nations urged restraint. Western donors froze portions of economic aid pending political stabilization, a devastating blow for a country already struggling with food shortages and unemployment. Colonel Randrianarina, in his first national address, appeared in uniform on state television, flanked by senior officers. He declared that the military had acted not to seize power, but to save the nation from collapse. He promised free and fair elections within 2 years, along with a program to cleanse the administration of corruption and restore dignity to the Malagasy people. Yet beneath the rhetoric of unity lay deep divisions. Political parties fragmented, old rivalries resurfaced, and suspicion permeated every institution. Civil servants feared purges. Journalists were detained for spreading instability. The streets of Antananarivo, once filled with protesters, grew quiet, not from peace, but from exhaustion and fear. For Madagascar's Muslim minority, the coup did not bring direct persecution, but it magnified the sense of uncertainty that already shadowed their lives. Muslims, who constitute between 2% and 7% of the population, are neither politically dominant nor economically powerful enough to shape national discourse. As the country's institutions fractured, Muslim leaders faced a delicate balancing act, maintaining neutrality in a polarized environment while protecting their communities from suspicion or political manipulation. In many coastal towns such as Mahajanga, Tuliar, and Nosy Be, imams delivered sermons emphasizing peace, patience, and nonviolence. Their message was consistent. The mosque is not a place of politics, it is a place of prayer. This distinction became crucial in a time when political rhetoric threatened to infiltrate every corner of public life. Religious institutions, both Islamic and Christian, were urged to remain impartial to avoid state reprisal or public backlash. Still, the coup had indirect consequences for Muslim communities. The freezing of foreign aid affected social programs, including faith-based schools and humanitarian projects often supported by international NGOs. In regions already vulnerable to poverty and environmental stress, the collapse of governance deepened hardship. Charitable networks organized by mosques became lifelines, distributing food and basic supplies when government assistance vanished. Moreover, the coup revived old questions about representation and belonging. Muslims in Madagascar have long been underrepresented in national politics, rarely occupying high-ranking government posts or parliamentary seats. As Colonel Randrianirina's transitional council began forming, no Muslim figures were appointed to visible positions, reinforcing a familiar narrative of exclusion. Civil society groups quietly raised concerns that minority voices, including Muslims, Indo-Malagasy communities, and coastal ethnic groups, would once again be sidelined in the process of rebuilding the state. Beyond the immediate political shock, the coup revealed a deeper crisis of national identity. Madagascar's historical fractures between highland and coastal peoples, between Christian and Muslim communities, between rural poverty and urban privilege, re-emerged beneath the surface of military rhetoric. For Muslim citizens, this was a reminder that their stability depends not on political favor, but on social cohesion at the local level. In cities like Antsiranana and Mahajanga, local Muslim councils began organizing interfaith dialogues and youth forums, promoting the idea that peace must be built from the ground up. The message resonated. While power changes hands in the capital, the survival of ordinary Malagasy people, Christian, Muslim, or otherwise, depends on cooperation, not competition. As of late 2025, Madagascar stands in a fragile transitional phase. The military government insists that reforms are underway, but skepticism runs deep. Rumors of internal divisions within the army persist, and sporadic protests continue in provincial towns. Meanwhile, the international community watches cautiously, torn between strategic patience and moral concern. Islam in Madagascar has long lived in the shadows of quiet endurance. It has neither sought political dominance nor confrontation, and it has rarely been the subject of international attention. Yet, in times of national crisis, it becomes clear how vulnerable quiet communities can be. The events of 2025, marked by mass protests and a military coup, did not bring overt persecution to Madagascar's Muslims, but they revealed how easily minorities can be overlooked, excluded, and silenced when state institutions falter. To understand the condition of Muslims in Madagascar, one must first recognize their diverse origins. The Muslim population is far from homogeneous. It consists of two main groups: the Karana, descendants of Indo-Pakistani merchants who arrived between the 19th and early 20th centuries, and the native Malagasy Muslims, whose ancestry traces back to the Arab, Swahili, and Comorian traders who introduced Islam over a millennium ago. The Karana community, though small, has historically played a significant role in the island's economic life. Many families established businesses in trade, textiles, and retail, particularly in cities such as Antananarivo, Mahajanga, and Toamasina. Their financial success, however, has also made them targets of suspicion during times of political or economic instability. In the aftermath of the 2025 coup, several Karana-owned shops were vandalized amid chaotic street protests. Though isolated incidents, they highlighted how fragile community relations can become when governance breaks down. Karana Muslims continue to face bureaucratic barriers in obtaining national identity cards and land ownership titles, issues that persist decades after independence. These problems are rooted in colonial-era classifications that distinguished foreign Asians from indigenous Malagasy. While most Karana families have lived in Madagascar for generations, some still encounter subtle forms of legal discrimination. Without clear documentation, they struggle to access bank loans, government aid, or higher education opportunities. In contrast, the native Malagasy Muslim population, primarily concentrated along the northwestern and southern coasts, faces a different set of challenges, not of documentation, but of representation and infrastructure. Many communities lack formal madrasas or trained religious teachers, relying instead on informal Quranic instruction passed down within families. In rural areas where literacy rates remain low and Arabic instruction is scarce, Islamic education often intertwines with oral tradition. As a result, religious knowledge is preserved more through practice and community memory than through formal study. The 2025 political upheaval has compounded these issues. With the suspension of international aid and widespread administrative paralysis, Muslim organizations found themselves operating in a vacuum, unable to coordinate with national authorities. Many Islamic charities and NGOs, which previously received small grants from Gulf-based donors or international partners, have seen their funding disrupted due to political uncertainty and tightened financial scrutiny. In Antananarivo, the Council of Muslim Associations of Madagascar, CMM, released a cautious statement urging unity and neutrality, emphasizing that the Muslim community stands for peace and reconstruction. Behind this diplomatic tone, however, lies a growing anxiety that Muslims, representing only a small fraction of the population, may be excluded from the national dialogue shaping Madagascar's future. The transitional military government, dominated by secular elites and Christian advisors, has so far shown little engagement with minority religious leaders. This exclusion is not violent, but systemic. Development plans, emergency aid distributions, and education reforms rarely mention the needs of Muslim-majority areas such as Mahajanga or Ambanja. In coastal regions, damaged by cyclones and economic decline, mosques have doubled as relief centers, providing food and shelter when the state remains absent. Yet these efforts often go unrecognized in official narratives of reconstruction. The situation is further complicated by social perceptions. While interfaith relations in Madagascar are generally peaceful, subtle stereotypes persist. Muslims are sometimes viewed as outsiders, tied to Arab, Indian, or Comorian ancestry, and their faith is often misunderstood in public discourse dominated by Christian institutions. In some schools, Islamic holidays are not formally recognized, and Muslim students report being pressured to conform to majority customs. Despite these obstacles, the resilience of the Muslim minority remains remarkable. Communities continue to organize charitable activities, zakat and sadaqah, maintain small local schools, and sustain networks of social solidarity that transcend ethnicity and geography. During Ramadan 2025, in the midst of political chaos and frequent blackouts, mosques across the island hosted communal iftars lit by candles, a powerful symbol of faith persevering in darkness. In Mahajanga, where both Karana and Malagasy Muslims live side by side, intergenerational cooperation has become a quiet model of coexistence. Wealthier traders contribute to mosque renovations and scholarship funds, while local fishermen donate part of their catch to feed students and the poor. This kind of grassroots Islamic philanthropy fills the void left by absent state structures and demonstrates how religious faith continues to serve as a stabilizing social force. For many Muslims, however, the greatest fear in 2025 is not persecution, it is invisibility. The fear of being left out of the nation's rebuilding process, of seeing their communities erased from the broader narrative of national identity. The challenge is therefore twofold: to preserve religious life and cultural dignity, and to assert civic belonging in a country where power and privilege remain concentrated in narrow circles. Madagascar's Muslims today stand at a crossroads. They are neither isolated enough to remain unaffected by the country's turmoil, nor influential enough to shape its outcomes. Their future depends on their ability to strengthen internal cohesion while engaging more visibly with the state and civil society. In the shadow of political collapse and economic paralysis, faith in Madagascar has become not only a source of solace, but also a form of resistance, a quiet resilience against uncertainty. Islam, practiced by a small but enduring minority, continues to function as a stabilizing moral force amid the turbulence of 2025. Across the country, from the coastal city of Mahajanga to the inner highlands of Antananarivo, mosques remain open even when schools and government offices have closed their doors. These sacred spaces have transformed into informal centers of relief and community organization. During the height of the coup's aftermath, when roads were blocked and supplies delayed, imams coordinated local food distribution, ensuring that no family went hungry. Women's associations within the Muslim community, often overlooked in national discourse, took on vital humanitarian roles, preparing meals, distributing water, and caring for children displaced by urban unrest. Sermons during Friday prayers became messages of endurance. Religious leaders avoided political rhetoric, emphasizing instead the Quranic values of sabr, patience, and adl, justice. In their words, the crisis was framed not as divine punishment, but as a test of moral responsibility, a moment to embody integrity when corruption and disillusionment had spread across public life. These messages resonated not only with Muslims, but also with non-Muslim neighbors, many of whom sought comfort in the steady, apolitical moral presence of local imams. During Ramadan 2025, when the country faced severe power outages and food inflation, the spirit of community intensified. Muslims gathered in dimly lit mosques, using candles or solar lamps to perform Taraweeh prayers. Fasting was observed under harsh conditions, yet it became an act of defiance against despair. Charity, zakat and sadaqah, increased not out of abundance, but from shared empathy. Even those with little gave something: a bowl of rice, a liter of water, or a few hours of voluntary labor to rebuild damaged community centers. In these moments, faith transcended ritual. It became a rhythm, a discipline of hope that resisted the chaos of political decay. The call to prayer, echoing over silent neighborhoods, reminded people that there is still order in the universe, even when there is none in government. Moreover, Islam's emphasis on ummah, the global community of believers, nurtured a sense of solidarity beyond borders. Donations from Muslim NGOs in East Africa and the Gulf reached local communities, bridging international faith networks. This support, though modest, reinforced a sense of belonging to something greater than the fragile state. As the transitional government struggles to rebuild institutions and restore public trust, the Muslim community's quiet consistency offers an understated model of civic strength. It demonstrates how moral conviction and social cooperation can survive even when formal systems collapse. In Madagascar's time of trial, Islam has not sought to dominate or protest. Instead, it has served as spiritual and social glue, binding neighborhoods through compassion, restoring dignity where politics had failed, and proving that faith, in its truest form, is not a retreat from crisis, but a foundation for enduring it. The political unrest of 2025 revealed not only the fragility of Madagascar's institutions, but also the emergence of a new social consciousness led by its youth. The protests that swept through Antananarivo and other major cities were largely driven by Generation Z, a digitally connected, politically aware, and morally restless generation that has grown up amid economic inequality, environmental degradation, and endemic corruption. Among these young voices are Muslims who refuse to accept the false divide between faith and civic responsibility. They see Islam not as a barrier to progress, but as a moral framework that demands justice, accountability, and compassion, values deeply relevant to a nation seeking ethical renewal. For this new generation, activism is an expression of faith. Many young Muslims have begun using social media platforms such as TikTok, X, formerly Twitter, and Facebook, not only to express political opinions, but also to share Quranic reflections on integrity and leadership. Their content often blends civic awareness with spiritual wisdom, discussing issues like corruption, gender equality, and environmental stewardship through the lens of Islamic ethics. This digital activism has expanded the role of Islam beyond the mosque, transforming it into a voice in the public square. In urban centers, student-led organizations are emerging as microcosms of reform. Muslim youth associations in Antananarivo, Toamasina, and Mahajanga organize tutoring programs, environmental cleanup campaigns, and charity drives. These initiatives are small in scale but large in meaning. They show that faith can translate into tangible social action. Some groups have even started interfaith volunteer projects, partnering with Christian and secular organizations to rebuild damaged schools and assist displaced families after the 2025 crisis. This cooperation marks a quiet cultural shift. Historically, the Muslim community in Madagascar has been cautious about political involvement, preferring social stability over confrontation. But the new generation, raised on global information flows, has seen examples from across the Muslim world, from Indonesia's civil movements to Senegal's religious reformists, and understands that faith can coexist with civic engagement. They are reinterpreting Islam as a call to ethical citizenship, not withdrawal. Education plays a crucial role in this transformation. Universities, particularly the University of Antananarivo and private Islamic colleges, have become spaces of dialogue where students debate the role of religion in governance and human rights. Some young Muslim intellectuals have begun writing essays and blogs exploring how Islamic principles could inform public policy, focusing on transparency, equitable resource distribution, and care for the poor. For young women, this moment also represents empowerment. Muslim women's associations are increasingly visible in leadership roles, promoting literacy, vocational training, and women's health awareness in both urban and rural communities. They embody a version of faith-driven feminism that aligns with Islamic ethics while challenging patriarchal interpretations that have long constrained social mobility. Madagascar, the vast island that drifts like a forgotten fragment off Africa's eastern shore, now stands at a critical juncture in its history. The political upheavals of 2025, the grinding poverty, and the relentless struggle for basic necessities have exposed the fragility of its institutions. Yet beneath this surface of instability lies a remarkable continuity of faith. The island's Muslim minority, though numerically small, embodies a moral resilience that speaks to something far older and deeper than politics: the enduring human capacity to believe, to hope, and to persevere. Islam in Madagascar is not a faith of conquest or dominance. It is a faith of endurance, carried across the Indian Ocean by merchants and sailors, nurtured in the rhythms of coastal life, and sustained through centuries of change. Its survival is not marked by grandeur, but by quiet persistence, a network of small mosques, Quranic schools, and families who keep faith alive through daily practice. Even when colonialism marginalized Islamic institutions and modern governments failed to provide for the poor, the faith remained unbroken, a spiritual current running through the island's diverse cultural and ethnic mosaic. Today, as soldiers patrol the streets of Antananarivo and citizens face power cuts and food shortages, the call to prayer still rises over rooftops at dawn and dusk. It is not loud, not political, but it is steadfast. In the shadow of instability, this constancy becomes a form of defiance, a declaration that dignity and devotion are not dependent on government or circumstance. The story of Islam in Madagascar is, in many ways, a reflection of the island itself, shaped by isolation, yet deeply connected to the world. The Muslims of Madagascar are the living bridge between Africa's Swahili coast, Arabia's ancient trade routes, and the Austronesian routes that link the island to Southeast Asia. In their language, architecture, and customs, one can trace the silent dialogues of civilizations that met not in war, but in exchange, learning, and mutual respect. Yet, this heritage now stands on uncertain ground. As the nation grapples with a fragile transition of power, as droughts and cyclones grow harsher with climate change, and as economic despair pushes young people toward migration, the survival of faith takes on new meaning. It is not merely a matter of religious continuity. It is about preserving the moral and cultural fabric that has held communities together through centuries of upheaval. In this fragile moment, the Muslim community's quiet endurance offers a moral compass for the nation. Their mosques are not fortresses, but sanctuaries. Their prayers are not protests, but affirmations of hope. Their patience is not passivity, but wisdom, the understanding that transformation, both personal and social, begins from within. As the sun sets over the Indian Ocean, the image of Madagascar is one of paradox, an island battered by crisis, yet illuminated by faith. The world may overlook it, preoccupied with larger powers and louder conflicts, but within this overlooked corner of the African continent, a lesson unfolds in silence. Faith, when stripped of privilege and protection, reveals its truest form. It becomes endurance, it becomes courage, it becomes the voice that whispers when all others have fallen silent. And so, on the edge of Africa, under uncertain skies, the Adhan continues to echo, carried by the wind across red soil and coastal waves, reminding all who hear it that belief does not need power to survive. It only needs sincerity. It is, and always has been, the heartbeat of a nation searching for its soul. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope it was useful. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.